Chapter 41. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ah! I screamed out loud with a frowning face without knowing my nose bleeding. And I was in shock. 2. What is? The ones that hit my face fiercely, and bounced. It was just a ball. A leather ball that children kick and play well. Pooh ha ha ha. I stare blankly at the ball rolling around absurdly, and a familiar sound of laughter sticks into my ear. That dog. Belsac, walking towards me, grabbed his stomach and laughed. Of course, there is Astalio, who is attached like goldfish poop. Look at that. Futch. Belsac pointed his finger at me. I frowned because of the fever, but I could still feel something running out of my nose. Nosebleed. With my nosebleed, I confirmed that the ball hit me hard. Belsac, who came right in front of me, see me, and began to roll around and laugh. Nosebleed. Astalio, the coward, was just amazed, unable to do anything, and just stand up, looking at the smiling Belsac. What are you doing? I shouted. You're crazy. Dog, too envied at the heat spreads up to my head. What? Dog. Belsac twisted his face violently, but he didn't even move. Let's try to erase the impression of being small. I can't go on like this. The ball has already rolled away, and the only thing I can get right now is the dirt from the ground. If so, I can use this one. I grabbed the dirt with my hands and sprinkled it on Belsac's eyes. Ah! My eyes. Belsac grabbed his face and rubbed it to remove the dirt from his face. I patted my shirt, stood up, and shouted. Hong! I like it. I was hit pretty hard with the ball, and my nosebleed wasn't stopping yet. I was a little scared to see red blood on my hands even after wiping it, but I couldn't put a spot in front of this dog's child. I planned to laugh at Belsac, who screamed because of his sore eye. By the way. It was weird. For a moment, my vision was shaken, and then Belsac and Astalio, who was restless next to me, overlapped with each other. Is it because of the ball? Or is it bleeding? My eyes turned around. Oh. That was why I couldn't avoid Belsac's hand pushing my shoulders with a tearful face. I fell back hard again. You. Belsac didn't think about what he had done, he was just angry and energetic. He looked around and found a wooden sword tied to Astalio's waist. Astalio, who haven't taken swordsmanship classes, but always carrying it as a toy. However, even if it wasn't a real sword, it is still a weapon. That's mine. But. When Astalio hesitated, Belsac reached out and pulled a wooden sword from Astalio's waist. Silence. Belsac held the wooden sword as tightly as possible. Looks like it will be used to hit me and will break one of the bones at any time. Yeah, he tries to hit me. I close my eyes tightly, try to forget the pain afterward. At that time, something seems to blow through the wind, and Belsac screamed loudly. Ah! It was a different scream than before. When I opened my eyes, Belsac was holding his arm, and a wooden sword and wooden swords have fallen to the floor. Tia! It was the twins calling my name out loud. I think the swordsmanship class was over. It was quite a long distance, but the twin who ran quickly stood between me and Belsac. Tia, are you okay? Mayron carefully looked at my prone face. And the moment he saw my face, his eyes widened in astonishment. Tia. How can you be like that? Blood. Gil-Lu. Mayron's face became so white, he called Gil-Lu, who has put a wooden sword at Belsac and Astalio. And when he saw my blood-stained face, Gil-Lu's eyes turned upside down. You Belsac. Gil-Lu's hand, who holding the wooden sword, trembled. Gritted his teeth, clenched his fists, and tried to stab the wooden sword into Belsac's neck, who was crying in pain. Stop it, Gil-Lu. I said urgently. I wanted to shout out loud, but I'm dizzy, so it doesn't work. Fortunately, Gil Lu heard my small voice and stopped immediately. And quickly came to me. Tia, Tia. I said when grabbed Gil Lu's sleeves. You can't hit him. If you hit that motherfucker, if you beat him hard, it's not fair for me. I have to pull out everything that can be pulled to him. But before I could say anything, I gradually lost my consciousness. I don't think I have hit Belsac while I'm fainting. Considering the usual twin personality, it's good enough. No. Eventually, I leaned my head in Gil Lu's arms and faint. Tia. Tia. Gil Lu and Marin's faces turned blue. His eyes looked trembling to see Florentina's white face which was covered in red blood. You. Belsac, you. Mayron said with terrifying eyes. Belsac and Estaliu flinched, couldn't say anything, and avoided Mayron's eyes. Mayron. Come on, we have to take Tia to the senator. If Gil Lu hadn't shouted at the time, Mayron would have taken the wooden sword that fell to the ground and beat Belsac and Estaliu. Until they pray that we'll never touch Florentia again. Mayun stared at the two and made Florentia lean on Gil Lu's back. We have to go. Gil Lu stood up with Florentia and shouted. Mayron also ran with one hand, supporting Florentia's back. The weight is too light. Gil Lu, carrying her cousin's younger sister, muttered while tightly closing his lower lip. Tears suddenly fall from his eyes. 13 For them she was always bright and cheerful, and sometimes even scary, so she seemed to be a few years old. Although her body was smaller than her peers, Florentia, who was on his back without strength, was too light and fragile. Mayron's face was already messed with tears and a runny nose. Belsac, I'm not going to leave you alone. Mayron was thinking the same thing. Why does Dar O'Malley's office feel so far away today? The servants and Lombardy officials stopped walking when they saw the twins crying and running with Florentia. However, the two 11-year-olds couldn't even think of asking for help from them, and they were running with their suckling power, with the conviction that they must bring Florentia to the hospital immediately. Dr. O'Malley. Doctor. Tia is hurt. When they finally arrived, the twins shouted. Dr. O'Malley jumped surprised. What happened? The doctor seems to be pounding and surprised at the appearance of the Shannonette's twins, and Florentia. Come on, lay down here. They are the twin of Shannonette, who is the strongest among the siblings, and the only Gallahan daughter, who is becoming a hot topic now. The idea of not taking wrong actions quickly appeared. After the twins retreated, the doctor pulls the curtains. And carefully looked at Florentia's condition. The nose was not broken, but there was a slight bruise and no other wound. Nose bleeding had already stopped. Still, in case he did not know, the doctor took off Florentia's clothes and looked closely, and sighed a little while locking the buttons again. There were no other problems. Something hit her nose, causing a mild concussion, and a lot of nosebleeding, which made her faint for a moment. Meanwhile, the twins' voice was heard outside the curtain. The doctor covered the blanket for Florentia, opened the curtain and came out. Is Tia okay? The twins, who were sitting in another bed, running and asked. Miss Florentia will be fine. Don't worry too much. Thank God. Gil Lu and Mayron were relieved and wiped tears with the back of their hands. But it's also for a while. They cried again because they were relieved. Phew. Dr. O'Malley, who sighed inaudibly, called a servant. And after a while. Bang. The sliding door of the lab opened wildly with a loud noise. It was Lombardy's Lord, Lulac, who walked in with a stiff face. For Dr. O'Malley, amazed while writing Florentia's medical journal, stood up from the seat, unintentionally looking at Lulac's face, and then quickly lowered his head again. Even though he didn't do any mistake, his heart was beating impatiently. The mood of Lulac was terrifying. Even the twins couldn't even make a joke and stood quietly. When Lulak walked in, it feels as if this small treatment room is full. Is the child okay? Yes, Miss Florentia seems to wake up without any problem if she takes a little rest. Dr. O'Malley replied quickly. Lulak looked at her granddaughter laying uncomfortable in bed. His eyes still stared at the black blood-stained dress. And soon after, Shahnanette arrived, half-running and taking a little breath. Mother! Oh! The twins jumped into Shahnanette's arms and burst into crying again. What happened to this? Shahnanette asked, patting the twins' back. That. After the swordsmanship class over, I was on the way to find Tia. Belsac was hitting Tia with a wooden sword. So we ran and saved Tia. Tia lost her consciousness. With a wooden sword. Hit? Shahnanette asked back in surprise. She knew Belsac hated Florentia, but fighting between cousins and wielding a wooden sword was a completely different story. That's why we tried to hit Belsac too. Tia told me not to do that. While painting, she tells us not to hit Belsac. Tia is such a good girl. The twins cried again, making a loud noise because the blissful feelings of that time had returned. Shahnanette noticed Lulak while appeasing the twins. It would be better if he was angry. It's worse when he's quiet like that. Just as expected, plus Lulak, who was quietly listening to the twins, ordered the servant next to him. Ask V's and Belsac to come to my office. Chapter 42. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When Lulak's servant had just found V's was just getting on the carriage to return to the mansion. He was having a social gathering outside and was on his way to the Lord's office to confirm a ridiculous word he was heard. My father looking for me. Yes, that's right. However, the servant who delivers the words looks strange. Avoiding the eyes and blurring the words, something is bound to happen. That's great. I had something to ask too. V's murmured in the carriage heading to the mansion. After arriving in front of the office, V's hid his discomfort and knocked, then entered the office. Father, I heard you were looking for. V's, who had just finished greeting, found his son Belsac standing alone in front of the table. Belsac. What's wrong with your arm? A white bandage was wrapped around his son's arm, which was fine until he left the mansion in the morning, and a splint sticking out from under his hand. Father, what's going on? Sit down. Lulak answered the question with an order. As V sat on the chair next to Belsac, Lulak said in a stern voice. Belsac, do you understand your fault? Belsac was silent, just bowing his head down. It was a stubbornness not to admit his wrongdoing. Lulak chalked his tongue at the sight of such a grandson. And looking at V's, said. Belsac hit Florentia with a wooden sword. Thanks to him, she's lying in the hospital with her nosebleed and passed out. As a father, you tell me. Only then did V's, who had a rough idea of the bandage and situation on Belsac's arm, answered without showing any remorse. What happened to Belsac's arm? It was because the Shahnanette's twin trying to protect Florentia. So where are they now? Since they made Belsac's arm like that, aren't they supposed to be here apologizing to Belsac? On the other hand, his tone of rebuttal was quite different from usual. V's voice, which he couldn't even talk back to his father, was filled with anger. Lulak was speechless at the sight. Even the desire to scold has disappeared. There was a certain amount of anticipation. No matter how self-indulgent V's is, he must know how to learn his son's fault. But Lulak was disappointed again this time. Rather than worrying about his son, he could only find a vigorous appearance as if he would punish the twins. Lulak, looking at his eldest son with cold eyes, said to Belsac, who stood between his father and grandfather. What you did today is totally unacceptable, Belsac. Whatever you think, Florentia is your cousin and a member of Lombardy. And in Lombardy, my words are law. Belsac's very tense shoulders flinched. He thought he'd to say he didn't hit Tia with a wooden sword as the twins said, he just hit her in the face with a leather ball, but he shut his mouth again. It was because he thought he'd get in more trouble if he protested like that now. The last time I told you to stop ignoring or harassing Florentia. Do you remember? Yes. Belsaca's voice became even smaller. Fortunately, there is no resentment like his father did. Lulak's anger faded slightly from his eyes. Because of your actions against my word, today your father will pay Florentia a huge amount of compensation. Father. Vise cried out in tears, but Lulak didn't even look at him. Also, Belsac, you are prohibited from approaching Florentia in the future. Until there are other words from me. He is prohibited. Just because the children have a little argument with each other. Vise raised his voice. Are you against my judgment now? Lulak's voice was lowered. Only then did he shut up, but his eyes were still full of complaints. Get out. Lulak ordered Belsac to leave. Belsac, who drooped his shoulders and looked at Vise once, left the office helplessly. No employees were coming and going in the quiet hallway. As he moved away from the office, his gloom gradually disappeared, and Belsac felt anger. This is not fair. She's only got a little nosebleed. I broke my arm. Belsac rolled up his fist and squeezed it. Grandfather's cold gaze kept popping up. It's all because of her. Because of that girl. Arg. Just around the corner, Belsac tripped over something that popped out. Kadang. As he fell, his broken arm hit the wall, and Belsac was too sick to scream. Oh, my God. It must be hurt. There was a voice of laughter. Well, you don't look too sick. Standing in front of Belsac on the floor were Gil-Lu and Mayron. Hey, Belsac. Does the broken spot hurt a lot? Belsac was so frightened that he couldn't answer and nodded. Then, the wooden sword that Mayron was holding suddenly pointed under Belsac's neck. Heeks. Belsac shrugged heavily at the cold touch beneath his chin. A broken arm hurts so much. What about a leg with thicker bones? As Gil-Lu leaned down and whispered, Mayron's sword moved accordingly to the shin of Belsac. Ha, don't do that. I'm sorry. Why are you apologizing to us? That's right. It's Tia you have to apologize for, right? The twins were about to grab Belsac by the collar and take him to Florentia. Belsac said with a tremor. My grandfather told me to stay away from the bitch, no Florentia. So, I can't even apologize. It was a very clumsy excuse somewhere, but the twins' faces brightened up. It was because they liked that Belsac could not come near Florentia. Yeah, that's great. Stay away from our Tia. Listen to grandfather. The twins giggled among themselves as if they had heard a funny joke. But that's also for a while. Mayron said as he tapped Belsac's shin with the end of the wooden sword. If you don't listen to him, here's next. I am here. Gil-Lu said, kicking the opposite shin with his toes. Oh, I see. Belsac nodded quickly. Then get well soon, cousin. Gil-Lu greeted Belsac by deliberately hit his injured arm. Ugh. The sound of Belsac's groaning and the twins' laughter mixed together in a quiet hallway. 2 at the same time, in the residential office. Belsac went out and the inside was engulfed in silence. Lulak had already begun to look at the documents as if Vise did not exist in this space, and Vise was feeling more humiliated by this. He shook his head, his trembling hands clenched into fists and said. Not only do you punish me, but you also punish my son too. Lulak's eyebrows, which were about to be signed, wiggled once. What do you mean? I know everything. You changed the Lombardy scholarship meeting to the day I took Belsac into the palace. The news was the reason why Vise was returning to the mansion. Lulak did not deny it. As a result, Vise's voice rises. You can't ignore me like this. My rank as the eldest son falls. So is it Galahad's work? Galahad. Lulak raised one eyebrow to the name of the third child that popped out of nowhere. You've given him a boost to that ridiculous clothing store. You're ordering clothes for useless employees. What? A ridiculous clothing store. Did it look like that to you? It's just a clothing store for the common people. Anyone can do that much. And yet my father sided with Galahad. I know you're trying to punish me, 3, so that's enough for him to say. Lulak burst into a laugh and said. If it's so easy, you should try it, V's. Get out of this family fence and make your own achievements as much as you're ever done. V's trembled at the word of blatantly comparing himself and Galahad. You're so mean, father. I can't believe it. Am I offended you, father? You just don't like me being close to the imperial family, right? 2 V's. My father didn't empower me, as the eldest son. If I didn't do this to borrow the power of the imperial family, then what else? Now, even the reason for being close to the empress was attributed to Lulak. Lulak, who was still listening to his son's pathetic story, put down the flag pen he was holding and said. Say it for sure. Have you ever had a drink with Yovans? You are not close to the imperial family, you are close to Anginas. Well, that's. And that's your greatest sin. Lulak's index finger was pointing to V's. The voice became lower and the surrounding air seemed to get heavier. It is your sin that you dare to let Anginas show interest in our Lombardy work. V's, who had been arguing vigorously a little while ago, suddenly felt a cold sweat flowing behind his back. It was because he realized that his father was very angry now. How dare you, Anginas? Lulak stared at V's. At this moment, V's was not his son. 9 Just a member of stupid Lombardy who defamed the family. V's stepped back half a step without realizing it. Before taking away the Browns' land like a fox, they wandered around the barren western part of the country, those bastards who only knew how to cling to their lineage. Oh, father. V's tried to apologize. He tried to relieve his father's anger even by kneeling down and begging for his hands. But his body was stiff and he didn't even feel like it. Lulak, who was shooting out terrible anger, called V's. V's. Yes, Lord. Don't make me take what you have in your hand now. V's chest sank harder than ever. Although he was the eldest son, all that was given to V's now was given by his father. Being able to take everything away from himself with a word at any time. With one gesture, it was Lulak Lombardy who could kick himself out of Lombardy. 3 And this Lombardy scholarship banquet is your choice. All you have to do is send your wife and Belsac to the palace. You choose whether you're at the palace or the banquet. V's eyes shook. Already, the Empress knows that he is bringing Belsac. If he disappointed her expectations and attends Lombardy's banquet, everything he has accumulated may gone. But at the same time, his father seemed to have bones in his words. After standing there for a while and dithering, V's bowed and left the office. Lulak, who seemed to keep looking at the documents without paying attention, sighed deeply at the sound of the door closing and dropped the documents. Just a moment ago, where did the angry face who pushing V's go? He looked at the door where his son had left with a complicated look. Chapter 43 You are listening at NovelFull.audio. When I opened my eyes again, it was already dark. Wow. I've slept too long, I'm trying to get up, and my body is frowned upon. As soon as a small sound came out of my mouth, someone ran in full swing. Tia, are you okay? It was the voice of a worried father. Dad. Yes, Tia. It's Dad. My father's familiar touch stroked my hair. Why am I still here? I was just hit by the ball and fell down. I also bleed some nosebleeds, but that's all. In fact, there was a time when I awake. But the bed is very comfortable. At that time, there were no twins already, and because it was quiet, it was good to relax, so I had to sleep more and get up later. And this time when I opened my eyes, I didn't know I would be lying here until dark like this. My Tia seemed to be sleeping well, so I was waiting for you to get up. Don't do that and wake up me instead, Dad. Still, it's a little embarrassing that I slept without hesitation while making my busy father wait. My father shook his head and laughed at me. This is not a big deal, but I wish you had a good rest. I also make my father worry. It wasn't a big deal, but it must have been a lot of surprises because I fell down. I laughed as I tried to relieve my father's worries. But my father's eyes even sadder. I heard a story from Shaunanette's sister. Belsac hit you with a wooden sword, eh? Wooden sword. I got a nosebleed because I was hit by the ball in the face. It turned out that Belsac picked up Astalia's wooden sword at the end. But you told the twins not to hit Belsac. My father's warm hand swept my forehead once again. Why are you so good, my daughter? That's it, I mean. It would be better if you took care of your greed a little more. A little more. I tried to figure this out by blinking my eyes. So, people seem to have misunderstood the situation before I fell. The reason I fell wasn't that Belsac wielding a wooden sword, but because I was struck by a ball thrown by him. Belsac couldn't even swing the wooden sword. And the meaning of the word, "don't hit Belsac," which I was about to fall, wasn't such a kind word. It meant, because my nose bleeds, I'm not going to let him stand still, so prepare yourself. Everyone seems to have misunderstood. Point 2 My father was looking at me with eyes that seemed to see the best angel in the world. Point 1 Perhaps that's the same with other people who have heard this story. People like the twins, Shaunanette, and grandfathers. The excuses made by Belsac or Astaliu would not have been accepted. Maybe it has already spread out loud in the Lombardy mansion. How do I do this? I looked up at my father, raising my head, which had been lowered for a while, and thinking. I'm fine, Dad. What do I do? Let the misunderstanding spread? I said with a more angelic smile at my father. My father laughed as he stroked my cheeks with a softer hand. Don't worry too much, Tia. Belsac will not be able to harass you in the future. Seemed good, but I didn't expect this condition to last long. Just as expected. It was Belsac, who I thought had improved his position because he became Astana's friend this time, as well as the last family banquet. And as soon as that happens, he just stepped on my back as if to relieve the resentment. It was obvious even if I didn't see it, such an idiot's mind. However, no matter how ridiculous I look at Belsac, there is no way to help the obvious difference in physique. I'm still young, and I'm smaller than my peers. Belsac, who is older than me, will increasingly gain that physical advantage, and I am compelled to worry about my future, which will continue to be thorny. Even I thought about what to do to prepare for Belsac's attack. But my grandfather came out like this and solved my worries instead. In fact, if he breaks the order of restraining access, he will be stopped, and Belsac will never linger next to me anymore. And in the future, he won't be able to make up his mind to hit me easily. I know that he is scared of grandfather. Dad, I'm fine now. Can't we go home? At my words, my father stood up and held me lightly. Once it looks like there's no big mark, the doctor said you had to stay in the room for a few days because he didn't know if there are other injuries. People thought I was beaten with a wooden sword by Belsac, so I can't do anything about it. I nodded quietly. As I passed through the darkened corridor in the arms of my father, a group of employees who are returning after finishing their daily routine recognize and greet us. Certainly, wearing a uniform gave them some unity and looked much better. At that time, a maid, with an impressive round face with big eyes, approached us carefully and asked. Well, Miss Florentia. Are you okay? I didn't know how to talk to her, so I couldn't answer right away and blinked. I heard you fell down. Another person came up and said anxiously. They weren't the only ones looking at my condition. Others who were going back with us also stopped and listened to our conversation. Originally, I was the one who talks without hesitation with the employees, but I wasn't so popular enough to get everyone's worries. Young Master Belsac is also terrible. Such a small and young Miss Florentia, too. You asked the twin young masters not to hit Master Belsac, even though you were in distress enough to get fainted. Different from the young Master Belsac, you must have been more worried because you feared that the twin young masters would be scolded. Oh no, such a nice girl. There was a whispering sound of several employees from behind. The rumors about me were so glorified that it seemed to be spinning. To live up to their expectations, I responded with an angelic smile, just like I showed my father a little while ago. I'm all right. Thanks for everyone's concern. A child's pure smile certainly works. At a glance, everyone's facial expressions were relaxed and their affinity toward me increased. My father thanked them with a glance and began to take the steps that had stopped again. Soon after, I got home and I asked my dad what came to mind. Father, I heard that guests are coming to the mansion soon. When is it? Ah, you mean the Lombardy Scholarship. I heard it's 3 days later. The mansion will be noisy after a long time. 3 days later. That was enough time to say that I had a few days off. So hopefully, I might be able to attend in time at the entrance for the banquet. However, I am worried that my grandfather will be too busy for a while because of that. Now I have to move slowly too. I felt a little nervous, but the Lombardy Scholarship came first. I thoroughly read myself. Empress, this great tea party. Thank you very much. Beautifully dressed Cyril greeted while bending her knees slightly in front of her cousin Rabini. 1. Your son, Belsac, has become my son's friend. I should at least care, Cyril. Rabini also rarely smiled and said. Originally, Belsac came with his parents, spent time with Astana, and had dinner together. However, the Empress, who received Cyril's letter a few days ago, changed all plans. The very next morning, among the high-ranking nobles who had townhouses in Pavlo district, letters were sent to those who had children of the same age as Belsac and Astana. It was an invitation to invite children of aristocrats and their guardians to afternoon tea parties and dinners. The title was, Good Tea Leaves Have Come In, so let's enjoy it together, but in the end, everyone gathered on the day when Belsac first officially entered the palace. When the nobles' banquet was held, the faces of the other children filled with envy when they saw Belsac, who had played with them, hanging around right next to First Prince. Cyril was very satisfied with it. Lorraine, who is shy, does not play alone today and having a good time in the center of girls her age. Then Cyril sees something and asks permission from the Empress to leave for a while. Honey. Cyril headed next to Vise, who was sitting at a table alone and drinking tea. Are you still worried? What am I worried about? However, Vise's complexion was still the same. Do you remember what I said? Cyril smiled and sat next to him, placing her hand in white gloves on Vise's hand. No matter how strong your father looks right now, time can't be stopped. After a few years, you will be able to do everything you want. I know, but he's the one who can take everything from us before that. Vise recalled her father's eyes, who were shining blue with anger, and drank the tea anxiously. Originally, he tried to remain in the mansion and attend the Lombardy banquet, but Cyril blocked it. And as planned, he came to the imperial palace, but he's in a cold sweat, he feared as if he had done something bad. But you want to follow Galahad? To be a little more independent. I see. What do you mean by that? Your father is implicitly hoping for you to appear a little more like the eldest son. How long have you tried to go against father's will? Vise nodded with a gloomy face. Maybe your father will like it. Maybe he wants you to stand up, even if you are scared, you have to do it. Is it? Vise was immediately persuaded by his wife's words. The memory that he sat down on his knees and tried to pray was gradually fading. And in that gap, every Cyril's words trickled into it. Because that's obvious. Obviously, at some point, you will be recognized in his heart. Hey, they can't beat me, the eldest son. To another ease of work filled V's heart. Cyril laughed and grabbed her husband's hand and made him stand up. The Empress is waiting for you. Belsac is getting used to First Prince, so you can just do what you were doing. Yes, as usual. V's regained his normal appearance and smiled, then approached the Empress, where people were gathered. On each large table were teacups and teaware exclusively made for the imperial family by craftsmen, and on one side, musicians were creating beautiful music. In the space where the children were playing, there was a thick, flawless green lawn. Each and every element that fills this space was a terribly splendid and gorgeous tea party. Bella, the maid, who was watching the scene from behind the pillars of the Empress Palace, quickly stepped into the kitchen. Bella, who had already entered the forest with food in her basket, arrived in front of the shabby villa and stopped for a while. Then he took out a small glass bottle from his chest and poured it into the stew in the basket. Because that kid eats all the stew, and leaves the hardened bread. He was truly a full-fledged prince. Because there are no commoner children, they leave the bread that they can't eat just because it has become hard after a few days. Bella, who had just forgotten about the gorgeous tea party, complained. Bella, who opened the door screaming in rust, walked in familiarly to the second prince's bedroom. Beep. There wasn't even a knock before opening the bedroom door. She glanced at the back, who crouching on a large bed in the distance, laid down the food on the table unintentionally, and left. Second prince slowly got up from her seat only after the sound of her footsteps and the sound of the closing of the door of the palace. Perez lifted the basket with an indifferent face and pulled out a stew bowl with a spoon embedded in it. She put it a lot. He doesn't know if the maids who bring the food know it. The poison they use is very small, but it has a peculiar aroma and bitter taste. Of course, the average person may not notice, but Perez was different. Perez, who had an exceptionally sensitive sense, could discern taste. The reason why he searched through herbal books for the first time was that the taste of the food changed subtly one day. But, knowing that it was poisonous, Perez continued to stew. She says I shouldn't be caught. So eat food and get an antidote. Even though he hadn't eaten a few teaspoons, he ignored his aching stomach and headed back to bed. Then he took out a round glass bottle from under the pillow and lifted it up. Perez's red eyes, drinking medicine as if familiar with it, gazing at the bright, almost bare, golden liquid. A small voice seemed to prick Perez in the back of a quiet room. Is she already forgotten about you? But Perez shook his little head. Thanks to it, his pitch-black hair fluttered in the air. No. She can't. Perez cherished the round glass bottle in his arms as if it were his own life. She wouldn't do that. Perez closed his eyes tightly and thought of Florentia. The brown hair fluttering gently in the wind, and the green eyes like spring leaves. The tears you shed for me. Perez hugged the round vial more preciously. 3*****. Wow, look, there are a lot of people. He said the mansion was going to be noisy, and it really was. There is unusually a large number of people every year. Or maybe I was short and the crowd seemed bigger. Tia. I brought the cake here, let's drink tea. Grandpa gave us a special opportunity to attend this banquet. Maybe it has something to do with Belsac's visit to the imperial palace today. Whatever the reason, it was a good thing for me. Astaliu could not have come to the place without Belsac, and Lorraine also entered the palace with Belsac. 1 The other cousins were too young to move alone. In the end, it was only me and the twins who attended the Lombardy Scholarships banquet. Thank you, you too. It was annoying to have the twins, they stick to me since the last day, but there are quite a few things that are comfortable as they are now. It was a moment when I tried to eat a bite of the cake with a fork. A woman passed by right in front of the table where we were sitting. She in her early 30s. However, his upright waist and graceful footsteps caught my attention. Found you. I forgot to eat the cake and laughed. A veteran maid who worked in various directions until the second Prince Perez became the crown prince. And a person who can take care of Perez, who is now alone, and become a strong support force. Caitlin Braun, the head lady of the Imperial Palace Maid, was seen from a distance. Chapter 44. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I kept watching her while pushing the sweet cake into my mouth. At first glance, Caitlin seemed to be leisurely enjoying the banquet, but her gaze was busy looking at the Lombardy employees working around her. In that gaze, there was a feeling of warmth and happiness, as if returning home after a long time. At least I thought I knew enough what Lombardy meant to her. Tia, this is really delicious, isn't it? Suddenly, Gil Lu, who was eating a cake with me, smeared white cream on his mouth and said with a laugh. Shall I bring more? Mayron asked, glancing at Gil Lu. No. I want to eat something else after a while. Yes, if you have something you want to eat, tell me. Mayron laughed at me when he tapped on the back of Giliu's hand, who trying to eat the last piece of cake that left over. Thank you, guys. I smiled as a sign of gratitude and put it in Mayron's mouth. Somehow, Mayron's cheeks seemed to be slightly red. He seems to be a little tall these days, but he is still a kid who likes sweet things. Point 2, I ate the cake too, so I have to take care of it now. As I said that and started moving, the twins quickly followed. It seems I have become a mother duck carrying yellow ducklings, but it is much more natural to go around like a child than to snooze alone. Pretending to look around, I gradually approached the table next to Caitlin. Oh, it's Claravan pellets. I was putting one cookie in the palms of the twins with both hands out, and I heard the men next to them whispering. He was talking while staring at Claravan on the other side of the banquet hall. Externally, since we weren't good enough to look close, Claravan was always keeping a distance from me. He's surrounded by women today. It was a conversation that seemed quite dissatisfied with Claravan. It wasn't just women that were crowded around Claravan. In fact, even though his attitude toward people was not particularly good, many male bureaucrats tried to stay close to Claravan at least a little, whether they had the magical power to attract people. But well, there are many women too. Look at that. Do women like that guy who doesn't have politeness? That's right. I wanted to tell those bitter losers. That face. Point 1, the face is the probability. But since I was busy now, I glanced at the men with pathetic eyes and continued to move table by table. And finally, I succeeded in moving to Caitlin's table. Now I have to talk to her. It was when I was rolling my head like that. Excuse me. A soft voice came from behind. Ha! It was Caitlin, who stood just 3 steps away from us and bowed his knees to greet us. I'm Caitlin Brown. I thought about how I would deal with her, but I'm lucky she comes to me first. Do you know us? When Gil Lu asked with eyes wide open, Caitlin smiled a little. Shouldn't immediately know the people from Lombardy. But it seems that everyone here doesn't know who we are. Mayron tilted his head. Because the respect for Lombardy is different, the behavior is bound to be different. It meant that his love for Lombardy was special enough to be interested in us, who are still children. Suddenly, I remembered one day when I was standing next to my grandfather helping work. Caitlin, a middle-aged woman, visited grandfather and had a brief interview on a day when it rained so much that it was difficult to see. And on the way out, she walked out of the mansion while getting all the rain. Still, I haven't forgotten for a while as I keep looking back. Even though he helped Perez and betrayed Lombardy to take revenge on the enemies of the Brown family, he was truly depressed. Hello. I'm called Florentia. I said hello as politely and neatly as possible. The last time I saw you, you were just a walking baby. You grew up really wonderfully. Certainly, the affection in Caitlin's eyes that looked at me was sincere. First of all, I should make a good impression by saying something good to hear. What compliment she would like, I thought about the right words to think about. I asked Caitlin, with my eyes wide open. By the way, if it's the Brown family, it's a very famous family for swordsmanship. Oh, my lady, how do you know the name of our family? Caitlin seemed surprised but was very happy. Caitlin's younger brother, who will soon inherit a lord title from his uncle, is known to have a very close relationship with her. Although he works alone in the fortress, his affection for his family and her remains strong. These two men talked about the basic imperial swordsmanship blah blah blah. So when I was curious, I looked for a book, and I found out that the basic imperial swordsmanship was originally called Brown Basic Swordsmanship. I wasn't lying. In fact, the twins' curiosity about Brown family swordsmanship has grown since the beginning of learning the swordsmanship class. Therefore, the Brown family was greatly influenced and respected by the imperial prosecutor. Even though the ranks of the family completely collapsed after the disgrace of being expelled from their estates that had been ruled from generation to generation about 40 years ago. Caitlin also grew up in Lombardy when her family fell and there was nowhere to go, and after reaching adulthood, she entered the imperial palace as a maid. It's such an excellent swordsmanship, the whole imperial people would have learned it and even named it imperial swordsmanship. As I talked with a little fuss, Caitlin's face turned slightly red. It's a word of praise. Then the twins were excited and asked Caitlin with a loud voice. Really? Really someone of that Brown family? It's embarrassing. Wow. It was such a big cheer that a few people standing around turned to us. Then Caitlin learned swords too. To my question, Caitlin showed her open palm with calluses. I'm learning in a short time, so I can barely protect myself. The Brown family said that women also learn swordsmanship, so it was true. The twins couldn't bite their mouths as if they would even join the Brown family fan club. So, don't you hold the sword now? What does Caitlin do? I deliberately asked for her job. I work in the imperial palace, my lady. Fortunately, Caitlin gave me the answer I was hoping for. In fact, she is not simply a person working in the imperial palace. He was the chief of the imperial palace maid. It was the 3 female chiefs who had the real power since they were held by an older maid and maintained as an honorary post. I clapped my hands as if startled and said, I've been to the palace before. With my father in the palace of the Empress. The Empress's palace. Was that so? The word Empress's palace gave Caitlin's face a brief dark look, but she smiled for the little ones soon after. Yes. But none of it was fun. Except for making friends. Friend. Caitlin tilted his head all the way. Yes. I was lost in the imperial palace. But. I was as depressed as possible and said in a small voice. But even now, I'm worried about that friend. He said he was sick. He said he was alone. Mississippi. Caitlin called me anxiously. Hee. It's nothing. But if you work in such an imperial palace, aren't you scared? As I turned to the Empress's story, Caitlin shook his head. It's okay because I have His Majesty the Emperor. Ah, that's right. I don't mean it sincerely. The Empress can't do what he can do to the person the Emperor trusts, but what about the feeling of having to see the face of the Empress from Angina's who messed up his family? Besides, there's no way that Rabini knows that Caitlin, the chief maid, is from the Browns family. My respect for Caitlin. If I were like her, I wouldn't have served the Empress for long. After that, for quite some time, I continued talking with Caitlin. And by the time the banquet was over, I could have confidence. The character and prudence were worthy of the title of chief maid, loyalty to Lombardy, knowledge and experience of swordsmanship, and, above all, hostility to Angina's, which is unavoidably reflected in the middle. That Caitlin is perfect as Perez's foster and guardian. Caitlin Brown. Lord is looking for you. Caitlin, seeing the Lord's cute granddaughter and grandson, moving away by waving her little hand with a bright smile, turned to the sound calling her name. It was Marvin Dillard, Dillard's first son. According to the will of the Lord, the scholarship is held several times a year and is hosted by a person from a different family each time. This time it was the turn of the Dillard family. As it is a large event, it would be efficient if one person took over it, but there was a reason for all of these methods. Caitlin followed Marvin Dillard's footsteps and walked the familiar path. After a while, the two arrived in front of the Lord's office. As if it was Caitlin's turn, Claravan was exiting from the door. "It's been a while, Caitlin. Claravan is still there." The two people who once lived in the Lombardy mansion were well acquainted. "The Lord is waiting." Claravan opened the door to the office in good manners. "Thank you," Caitlin said with a small smile. Claravan gave a small bow to Marvin Dillard, then turned his back and walked. "This guy." Marvin Dillard muttered a little when he saw Claravan's back. Was those two people so close? Caitlin tilted her head and stepped into the office. There were only two people in the room, Lulak and Caitlin. There was neither a secretary nor a butler in the office. The atmosphere is completely different from the chattering and friendly banquets outside. There was a chair without armrests in front of the desk in the office, which seemed to be huge every time. Caitlin, breathing silently, sat in the chair. "That nervous personality doesn't change," Lulak said with a smile at that appearance. "Yes, Lord," Caitlin greeted politely. "So what kind of news did you bring today?" Lulak asked right away, without making a fuss. This is the reason why the Lombardy family holds scholarships even at the enormous expenses each time, and the reason why the family that hosts a banquet is different every time. The second Prince Perez's nanny was found dead, for the scholarship is a way for Lombardy Lord to sit in his office and take a peek into the entire empire. It was information gathering days. Chapter 45. You are listening at novelfull.audio. "Dead?" Lulak asked again while pulled himself away from the back of the chair. "Yes. 2 days ago, she was found in the southern part of the Server River. If she was found near the water, it would be difficult to find out her identity. Even though she was found near the Server River, but the cause of death was not drowning. Her both hands were tied. So it must be done by humans." Lulak clicked his tongue. "What should I do?" Caitlin asked carefully. "Now it is confirmed that his nanny is dead, what should I do?" She muttering, and her facial look wasn't good. The second prince disappeared from the imperial palace where she worked, and for a long time, his whereabouts were unknown. Apparently, Caitlin felt very responsible for this job. Caitlin. "Yes, Lord. You just have to live your life. Then, when you come across information that might be of use to Lombardy, you just have to remember it and let me know. However." Caitlin squeezed her dress so tight that it was wrinkled. "Did the others hear anything, Lord?" It was taboo to ask for the information that other people brought here. The scholarship members carried very little information, so Lulak gathered them together to hear about it. Knowing it well, Caitlin took the courage to ask. "There is no other intention. It is only because the existence of the second prince is very important to Lombardy, so." Even Lulak didn't reprimand Caitlin. He just looked up and admitted that Caitlin was right. Isn't that hilarious, Caitlin? Even if he is a prince, a child who doesn't even have a presence like him is someone I need. It was a sentence of justification mixed with laughter. The reason why Lulak was looking for the second prince was simple. It was to check Angina's power, that is, Empress Rabini. The most absolute card that the Empress possesses is that she is the Emperor's wife and the mother of his only son. The Emperor apparently had one more son, but nothing. The Emperor's attitude that pretended not to know about the seeds he sowed gave the Empress even more opportunities. It's because I moved too late. Lulak was disappointed. If he knew a little bit earlier that the second prince's mother was dying, he can just put the second prince under Lombardy's protection. Without realizing it, the Empress dared to interfere with the issue of Lulak's inheritance. Anginas keep snooping around what's going on under my roof, but I have to take my hands off and see. Ha! Rabini Anginas is involved in Lombardy's affairs, pretending to be a V supporter, but there is nothing Lulak can do. Now it was very clear, the second prince was well hidden, so he couldn't even find a reason to face the Empress. Lulak frowned even more. Is he already dead? It was said that the villa in the forest where the second prince lived with his mother had been vacated for a long time. The presence of the second prince and his servants was not noticeable in the abandoned separate palace, which was like a ruin. So, Lulak ordered Caitlin and the other scholarship members working in the imperial palace to find the whereabouts of the second prince's nanny. It was because he thought that the second prince and the nanny would have been sent together somewhere in the land owned by Anginas. But the nanny was found dead in the southern part of Serva River. There was a high probability that the second prince's body could not be found and drifted along the river. In the imperial palace filled with adults, it shouldn't be difficult to find him and his maid. Lulak shook his head and lamented. The first prince are the only children living in the imperial palace. Lulak decided it was time to stop looking for the second prince. I heard from young Miss. Something went through Caitlin's head as she listened. Yes. She said when attending Empress invitation, none of it was fun. Except for making friends. It was Florentia's word, whom she had met a while ago. Caitlin thought about what she had heard. She said he was sick, and alone. Alone. Until now, under the command of Lulak, they were targeting a combination of children and court ladies. It was because he didn't think that the Empress would have left the second prince alone. But what if she hides the second prince alone, then moves the nanny to trick us? Caitlin carefully opened her mouth to tell Lulak, who seemed to be pondering. ****, Grandpa, I am here. I was just about to have dinner with Jeanette and the twins after hearing the news that my father was late again. The butler came and told me that my grandfather was looking for me. When I entered the room, there was a simple meal on the table like last time. Our Tia is here. I called you to eat with this grandfather. I like it too. I did something. Maybe he just wanted to have dinner with his granddaughter. I settled down and sat next to my grandfather and began to eat. Now, eat this too. This too. Grandfather stroked my head when he pushed the delicious foods in front of me. Eat yours too, Grandpa. It's delicious. When I put the third piece of meat into my mouth, my grandfather, who looked at me, asked. Let's hear it, doesn't Tia have a friend? A friend? Yes, in the imperial palace. I was off guard. I hid my embarrassment while pretending to chew meat. What would a typical 8-year-old child react to his grandfather's question? Gulp. After swallowing a chunk of meat, I put the fork down. How did Grandpa know that? I opened my eyes and raised my voice pretending to be startled. Young children still do not know about the complicated relationships of adults. What I talked to Caitlin about friends in the imperial palace doesn't have any other intention, it just because of my anxiety and longing for a friend. I talked back to my grandfather. He laughed while pinching my cheek a little so that my cheek wouldn't hurt. I heard it from Caitlin. About a friend you didn't tell this grandfather. Do you know how sad I was? Grandpa also said with a smile, without signs of anger. Yeah. I have a friend. When I went to the imperial palace with my dad before, it was when I got lost. I was afraid of being scolded. So. Are you lost? 3 Probably, my father ordered the people to join forces. There is no need to consider the Empress and the Emperor. My father is really nice. The problem is that I can't be that nice too. Yes. Suddenly, Scary Knight stopped the carriage and told me and my dad to get off. They fight with my dad and angry. So I got off too, but I got scared. As soon as my grandfather heard it, he seemed to notice who had ordered it. He gritted his teeth and coughed when he saw my eyes. Then he asked again in a soft voice. So, what kind of child is Tia's friend? Is he a friend of the same age as Tia? Yes. He 3 years older than me. Ah. He has very dark hair and his eyes are red like a rabbit. Grandpa's eyes were no longer smiling. I quickly added. When I got lost in the Imperial Palace, he helped me. Yes. That's a good child. But my friend lives alone. Alone without a mother or nanny. He looked so lonely and sick, Grandpa. My grandfather stroked my head and his hand stopped. Alone. Yes. That's why he said he envied me for having so many families. Oh. But my grandfather's reaction didn't seem like he was going to run to the Imperial Palace right away, as I thought. Damn it. At first glance, it seemed like a sympathetic voice, but I know my grandfather's way of speaking. You have a lot of thoughts, aren't you? Maybe today the scholarship members brought a lot of information. Everyone would have come in when grandfather called, and they would have put down what they knew and went out. If I leave it like this, I don't know how many days or weeks it will take grandfather to move. No, I wonder if he would even try to get involved in Perez's work. But Perez doesn't have time to do that. I originally planned to use the birthday gift voucher that I had to go with my grandfather to see my friend at the Imperial Palace. Although I told Caitlin only a little bit of information, it helped me inadvertently. Unlike my father, it's not easy to get involved with my grandfather to be sure. I thought about it for a while and made a decision. I have to give grandfather the reason why he has to move quickly. And when I hesitated, my grandfather reassured me. Don't worry. You can say anything to Grandpa. I wriggled my fingers and said boldly. And he said he was sick. Someone is hurting my friend. I bowed my head while making a sad expression as much as possible. Someone is trying to hurt him. Grandpa still didn't say anything. I said again while holding on to my grandfather's sleeve. Grandpa, can't you help me? Certainly, the granddaughter's earnest request worked, and the grandfather's cold expression shakes. My grandfather, who looked at me with a complicated face, asked in a soft voice. What is your friend's name, Florentia? Looks like he needs confidence. I replied again and again. Perez. My friend's name is Perez, Grandpa. The moonlit night was deep. Lulac Lombardi poured a drink and looked out the window. It's been a while since his granddaughter Florentia returned to her room, but Lulac's worries did not end. When he knew where the second prince was, another thought approached him. There were many things to consider. The information brought by those who had come before Caitlin was entangled, and his hair was almost mirrorless. But it was because of the problem about his family that complicated Lulac's mind more than any politics and interests. Lulac, who had emptied the drink halfway, stood, and wiggled the bell. After a while, the butler quietly opened the door and entered. John. Yes, Lord. Is V's back? He was the first son who ignored Lulac's warning and picked up his wife and children early in the morning. That is. John the deacon answered reluctantly. A little while ago, a letter came from the coachman. It seems that V's.Nim's family is likely to stay at the Imperial Palace tonight. He seems to attend the Imperial Palace banquet tomorrow evening. Lulac hadn't said anything for a while. The butler couldn't figure it out, so he waited quietly, bowing his back. After a while, Lulac said in a low voice. I see. That's the decision he made, for click. The sound of putting a cap on the window sill can be heard in the office. Tia. Tia, would you like to wake up for a moment? I woke up while rubbing my sleepy eyes with the hand that shook me. Dad. The first thing I saw in a dark room was my father. My father, wearing only a silk robe in his pajamas, woke me up with a confused face. Are you very sleepy? Yeah, it's okay. But why? I think Tia should get up a little earlier today. There is no way my father wakes me up before dawn for nothing. I woke up like I had jumped into icy water while my father continued to glance behind the half-closed door. I quickly got out of bed and opened the door barefoot. Likewise, grandfather was sitting on the couch in the dark living room. Oh, did you wake up? Like a person who woke up after a single sleep all day, a grandfather with a lively voice was already ready from head to toe. When he saw me holding the doorknob, my grandfather said with a smile, "1, wouldn't you like to go to the Imperial Palace with this grandfather, Florentia?" Chapter 46. You are listening at novelfull.audio. No further explanation was needed. I shouted at my grandfather and stretched out my two hands. Okay, wait for a second. Wait a minute, Grandpa. Ha! Leaving my grandfather tilting his head, I hurried back to my room. Dad! Bag! Bag! Ha! Yeah. My father, who was standing blankly, was also busy because of me. I found a square leather bag in the corner of the room and spread it on the bed. Then I throw the things I think Perez will need and use into the bag. This book and that one too. And cookies, candy, writing tools. For a while, I ran around the room and the house packing my things. It didn't seem like much, but the bag immediately filled up. What are you doing, Florentia? My grandfather, who was waiting in the parlor, finally came into my room and asked. I packed some of the things I needed. It won't take long, so wait a minute, Grandpa. Suddenly there was a small garden on the bed. You need them right now. Grandfather tilted his head because he couldn't understand. I looked back at grandfather and answered. To bring to Perez. You give it to him. For some reason, my grandfather's eyes wriggled. Are you doing that because you don't use it anymore? I didn't bring much. But I didn't think that my grandfather's frown would open. When we meet Perez, Grandpa will understand my heart too. If you see that thin child, you will probably want to feed and take care of anything. I am telling the truth. Okay. Let's go. My grandfather's voice was a little weird, but I shrugged once. Then I take the leather bag and lifted it with one hand. No, I tried to lift it. Wow. The bag is quite heavy, so my body swaying. I have a lot of stuff. My father sighed a little next to me and tried to pick up my bag. But I shook my head a little and said in a voice as lively as my grandfather. Now I'm ready to see Perez, Grandpa 2 ******. I wrapped my bags around happily, then after a while, we left the mansion. No matter how much you want to see him, or you try to go to the Imperial Palace in pajamas. My grandfather shook his head and said as if I was absurd. Now, it's because I got up while I was sleeping and I'm so busy. Oh, it's embarrassing. I shouted to go to the Imperial Palace while wearing a nightgown with lace. If I had found out, I would have laughed a little less confidently. I looked out the window, pretending to be calm and casual. It was still before the sun came up, so the sky and the road where the carriage was running still dark. Our group was very simple to say that the Lombardy Lord was moving. It was all about the carriage and the Knights of Lombardy who followed. It is all silent except for the sound of a horseshoe and the sound of carriage wheels rolling on the road. I looked back at my grandfather sitting next to me. Perhaps because of the faint light in the carriage, the wrinkles of the eyebrows looked deep today. When he talked about Perez last night, he seemed to have a lot of thoughts. Let's come and talk together before the morning sun rises, so what has changed his mind? I couldn't ask my grandfather directly, but I could feel vaguely from the deep wrinkles, indicates that the reason wasn't good. The carriage ran without stopping when we go out of the Lombardy territory, and when we run through the fields and past the gate. The soldiers from a distance saw the carriage approached quickly, which only the Lord of Lombardy could do. The enormous castle gate, which would have been firmly closed until dawn, but the curfew was released and gave away too easily in front of the Lombardy pattern. The wagon we boarded didn't even need to slow down. And finally, we reached the front of the Imperial Palace. I was a little nervous. There was also a case last time because the Imperial Palace is still the Imperial Palace anyway. When the wagon slowed down, I changed my posture and sat down thinking that someone might open the wagon door right away. However, grandfather's posture of looking out the window with his beard on his chin remains unchanged. Then he turned his head to see my sudden gaze, and our eyes met. And at that moment, the carriage started moving again like a lie. Even the owner of the castle was not yet awakened from sleep. We walked straight from the front gate of the Imperial Palace. Grandfather looked at me a little surprised and said, reaching out and stroking my head. "Did you think we would be checked like last time? I know it'll be okay because I was with Grandpa. But, it's still Imperial Palace. Lombardy's lord knows that he can walk into the Emperor's office if he wishes, without anyone's restraint. However, it is a separate story from what I know in my head." Grandpa patted my head and said soothingly, "You are Lombardy. Lombardy is not afraid of the imperial family." Wow. Cool. My grandfather muttered softly as he stared at the cuteness that made him laugh. Cheeky things. Don't worry about your grandfather, child. Your grandfather is going to be very angry today. I don't know exactly who you're punishing, but I nodded vigorously. In the meantime, the carriage entered the Imperial Palace. Like in the rest of the world, it was a quiet place, except for the sparse lights along the way. "Where should we go?" The coachman opened a small window and asked. "I only know how to walk from here." "Then it can't be helped." My grandfather, who seemed embarrassed for a moment, opened the door of the carriage and got off. I also jumped down while holding my grandfather's hand. The coachman said he would follow us with my luggage, but grandfather shook his head and carried my bag in his hand. It must have been a judgment that he couldn't show Perez to anyone. "Let's go, Florentia." Grandpa reached out to me. Unlike my father's hand, I walked on a path in the invisible forest holding a slightly more crude and warmer hand. Fortunately, the eastern sky was gradually brightening. Relying on my memory, I arrived at the place where Perez was plucking and eating herbs. And I realized. I only know its way west, I don't really know where Perez lives. "Grandpa, that's it." "Why?" "Because I saw Perez here last time. And I couldn't hear anything outside that he lives in the woods west of the Empress's palace." Contrary to my expectation that it would be in trouble, my grandfather seemed to have a point somewhere. "Is it there?" My grandfather muttered an unknown word and looked at a faraway place where only dense trees could be seen. "It's nastier than I thought." My grandfather's grasp of my hand. "From here on, grandfather knows the way, so let's go." My grandfather walked first with a hardened face. And after a while, we stood in front of a small palace. It was an old building that looked close to ruins because it was not managed. When the wind blew even a little, the sound of the window beeping rang out. "You must be crazy." The curse came out without my knowledge. No matter how it is, she leaving a child alone in an abandoned house like this. The storehouse of the Empress is more comfortable than this. My grandfather said while looking at the palace with a serious eye like me. "One of the concubines of the late emperors live here." Grandpa couldn't speak all the words he has and shortened his words, but he seemed to know everything. The Empress's wish made Perez and Perez's mother live in such a place. Maybe, nobody will be here. Even so, this is too. Did you say that he was in the west of the Empress Palace? There is only this one palace in the western forest, and this is the place where the second prince lived with his mother. Well, then really. Honestly, the building looks like it wouldn't be strange even if a ghost pops out right away. Living here alone for years. I wouldn't be able to withstand one day, don't think about a year. I realized again how viciously Perez survived. Point 1, let's go inside. I was just about to go inside at the words of my grandfather. Bang! There was a loud sound, and the door opened with full force as if it were falling apart. And the little boy who pushed the door came out toward me. His black hair fluttered every single step he jumped on the floor, and his white skin shone like clean porcelain even in the twilight of the dawn. P.E. Perez. Ow! Perez, who arrived in front of me in no time, immediately hugged me. Point 8, the body hitting me with a humming sound was painful, but I couldn't push him away. The hand of the guy leaning his head on my shoulder and holding me tightly was so desperate. Florentia. The voice of the thin guy calling me is trembling. Hey, let go of this. I can't breathe. I said deliberately in a deep voice. Then the guy who seemed not to let go of no matter what happened gently withdrew from my words. But it was just half a step. He only stepped back and stared at me. With his right hand still gripping the sleeve of my clothes. It was still an expressionless face, but his red eyes were only looking at me. Why is he doing this? Well, since he was alone in a place like this, it would be nice to see anyone. I said I will coming again. Why are you so fussed? Because I thought you forgot me. My conscience was a bit stabbed, but I said with a nostril. Did I look like I couldn't keep my promises? Bung bung. Instead of answering, Perez shook his head vigorously. It was then. A large hand approaching grabbed the back of Perez and put him down. Stay away from my granddaughter. 20. It was my grandfather looking down at Perez unfavorably. Chapter 47. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Are you okay, Tia? My grandfather asked, brushing off my clothes that Perez was holding. I'm fine, Grandpa. This kid here is my friend. Perez Brivicho Dorelli. Perez's shoulder flinched a little. However, the cold-hearted grandfather's gaze only looked at him up and down, as if evaluating an object. Grandpa. It was my first time seeing such a figure, so I carefully called my grandfather. Yes, this kid is the second prince. You can tell even when you meet him while walking outside the palace. Why? The grandfather replied without taking his frown from Perez. You guy, you resemble the late emperor very much. I think you are not Jovans, but the late emperor's child. 7. Perez's eyes shook at the words. Did no one tell you? When Grandpa asked, he nodded a little. Hey. Your mother would have seen the late emperor, and Jovans wouldn't have wanted to remember his father. The Emperor's Majesty wasn't good with the late Emperor Majesty, Grandpa. I don't know. Grandpa said with a big smile. I'm still not sure Jovans didn't poison his father. It's a whole trash family. Point 1. I thought Lombardy was a mess, but the imperial family too. At least, V's waited quietly for his father to die in old age. When I was still silent, my grandfather looked at me and quickly spoke. Of course, it's not something our Tia cares about. Forget what grandfather said. Yes, Grandpa. I replied quickly like a good granddaughter who listens well. Yes, yes. And you? Grandpa's gaze turned back to Perez. It was better than before, but it was still somewhere cold. Are you living alone in this separate palace now? Nod. No maid or nanny. Nod nod. Seeing that you haven't starved to death yet, what you eat is something someone sometimes brings. Nod. Is it possible for the emperor's son to be dumb without speaking? Someone should know how to answer in proper words. Grandpa screamed. Then Perez, with his shoulders shrugged, hid behind my back. That guy. Grandpa also reached out to grab Perez's back, as if he didn't like it. But for some reason, my grandfather stopped. I jumped in the gap and laughed while grabbed grandfather's hand. Grandpa. Go inside and talk. My leg hurts. In fact, it wasn't my legs that would hurt just because I was standing this far, but I trembled. Yes. Florentia, you will be in first. How about you, Grandpa? Grandfather talks a little with this guy and then goes in. Grandpa's expression was determined. If I insisted on staying here, I felt like he would pick up Perez again and put him in the wagon. First of all, now is the time to listen to my grandfather. I have no choice but to turn my back and head to the separate palace. My grandfather said to Perez, who still looked at me. She is your saviors who have carried me so hard. Look pretty well, one sweet. Florentia enters the palace, and the old door is closed. Lulak looked down at the second prince in front of him. Deliberately did not hide the sharp and heavy momentum. When Lulak was like this, even a healthy adult couldn't raise his head easily. But Perez was different. His bright red eyes were looking straight up at Lulak. Like a white porcelain mask, the face without change was filled with sharp alertness. It was completely different from when Florentia was next to him. A little while ago, when Lulak reached out his hand, he even put it in his eyes for a while. That's pretty good. Hearing the voice of his granddaughter and seeing him rushing out and listening to her words, Lulak thought he was a petty puppy that lost his mother. Now Lulak sees him as a very clever bum. For Lulak laughed. I thought that only the appearance resembles the late emperor, but your personality is also very good. The young Perez was evaluating Lulak. Seeing the appearance of a forgotten prince with a poor body who would stop breathing just by reaching out and twisting his neck. A lonely person who won't cry even if he dies. Such appearance is very sharp, like the spearhead. Even though the late emperor was a human who failed to protect his family, as an emperor who ruled the empire, he succeeded in doing his job. And, ironically, that's what made Lulak's anger subside a little. Lulak wanted to pretend didn't know and just let him die. But couldn't. Do you want to live? Lulak asked Perez. If I say a word, I want. What should I do? Would you like to save me? Perez was clenching his small fist. Bloody gaze was gleaming toward Lulak, who mocked with his life. Red eyes, it was called Ruby, which came in as a gift by accident. At the moment, Lulak imagined how Rabini Anginas gnawed her teeth while looking at Perez, and he felt better. In fact, that alone was enough reason for Perez to remain alive. Yes, I decided. I will save you. Lulak smiled while rubbing his beard. You're lucky that your presence makes the Empress very unbearable. Perez was not happy. Rather, he spoke in a voice full of hostility. Florentia doesn't resemble you at all. What? Ha ha ha. Lulak broke his back and burst into a big laughter. Yeah, that's very fortunate. Isn't it? My granddaughter doesn't look like me, so there's not a single dirt on it. Then the smile disappeared from Lulak's face in an instant. And warned him. So don't think of sticking to my granddaughter. You're not the one for her. Do you understand? 30 Lulak remembered Perez's eyes while looking at Florentia. It wasn't just a child's pure friendship. It was a kind of fire that if a little time passed and they grow up, it would quickly ripen and set fire. 1 Although Perez was a descendant of the emperor, he was not that important. For Lombardy, being a member of the imperial family was rather a factor of deduction. Perez didn't answer, but Lulak didn't need an answer either. As of today, from now on, Perez's desire to live is as big as Lulak's possession. If you try to get too close to my granddaughter, you might not know whether you were a dog or a criminal. I could pull the collar in you. Lastly, Lulak, who looked at Perez, turned to find his granddaughter. Where are you, Florentia? Opening the door of the separate palace and shouting out loud, the pleasant voice seemed like a completely different person. While Perez and my grandfather were having a conversation, I was looking around inside the palace. Like a building inside the imperial palace, it was large and spacious, but the unmanaged palace was empty. I carefully stepped on the stone steps up to the second floor. It was broken here and there, so I had to be careful with my steps. Of course, no one would have been able to light the lights in time, so I can only see the only room with the door open on the other side of the dark corridor. Wow, really? When I opened the door to the bedroom, I lost something to say. My prediction that I thought it would be messy and dirty because a child lived alone without the care of an adult was completely wrong. I wouldn't have been surprised if it had been. Perez's bedroom was empty. It was all about a large bed, simple furniture, and stacked books. Except for the old utensils placed in front of the fireplace, there was no trace of people living in this room. There weren't any of those common ornaments or anything that looked valuable. There was no way that the treasures of the palace that a child lives alone without an owner will remain. Ah! Except for the two things I found while sitting on the bed. It was a wooden sword on the side of his bed and a bottle of medicine I gave. The two items were placed in a circle on top of the blanket. At that time, I heard my grandfather's voice. "Where are you, Florentia?" "I'm here." I quickly ran down the stairs. Fortunately, Perez looked fine with no wounds. Then it is. My grandfather isn't bad enough to get angry with a poor kid like that. When I jumped and stood in front of him, my grandfather bent his back slightly, keeping eye level, and said, "Grandfather has a place to go for a moment, so wait here. I'll leave one knight outside, so don't worry." A knight with a slightly familiar face held the bag I had brought in his hand and bowed. "Yes, Grandpa." "Ha ha, kids." Grandpa finally stroked my head and went outside. Lombardy's carriage, who was waiting, picked up Grandfather and started running along the forest path. I waved my hand and asked Perez, who was standing next to me. "What did you talk with my grandfather?" "Nothing. You've been out for quite a while." "What did you talking about?" "I didn't say anything." "So, did you get scolded by my grandfather?" "Well, it wouldn't have been much." As I closed my curiosity, I reached out a hand to Perez. He looked at me meaningfully. "Let's go, because I brought this and that to give you. The way up the stairs is quite difficult. If this skinny guy fell by mistake, he might get seriously injured." In that sense, I stretched out my hand. Perez, who blinked slowly once, held my hand, perhaps because he was slow in everything. I started to climb the stairs first, holding the hand that was gently grabbing me tightly. I wondered if he didn't like holding hands with me, but fortunately, he was quietly following my step by step. And when I got to the bedroom, Perez was holding my hand tighter. Jovans walked through the halls of the imperial palace with a stiff face. It was a step full of impatience. When he arrived at the office, the servant standing in front of him quickly opened the door. The sky tinged with the red sun was just rising, and the sunlight shone deeply into the office through the open window. And there was a man who received the light intact and greeted Jovans. "It's been a long time, Your Majesty." It was Lulac Lombardy, sitting and drinking tea as if it were his own office. Glossary Ossuary underscore 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 1, Kangaroo, Gibbon. Soybean flour family. A broken family, a disrupted family. 2, Dong July. Dong a rope, from Korean fairy tale that a rope comes down from the sky and rescues the sister and brother who ran away from the tiger. Here, the Dong July is like a helping hand in a moment of crisis or savior. Chapter 48. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What are you doing here? He endured the frowning of his eyebrows, but a trembling voice came out. Emperor Jovans hurriedly coughed and corrected his words. "I mean, why did you come to this place?" "Just like that," Lulac said with a smile, making wrinkles around his eyes. "It's been 3 years. The Lord of Lombardy never left Lombardy's territory. That was a good thing for Jovans, but that's also annoying. The old man knows all the stories of the imperial palace, but the emperor himself just knows a little what's going on inside Lombardy. That's it. Jovans returned to his composure and responded, naturally sitting at the seat. You've been a lot desperate. But it's also for a while. At Lulak's words, Jovans's thick eyebrows wriggled once. It was incredible that he treated the emperor as if he had met a town child after a long time. How many times did this old man want to come to the imperial palace? The last time I met you, I remembered the words of His Majesty and turned around in front of the imperial palace gate. What are you heard? I think I already consider the Lord of Lombardy to be my uncle. I have no confidence to lead this empire from the imperial palace, so Lombardy can in and out as if it was your house. If you want to get me out of the throne, keep your face on the meeting. Jovans had nothing to say. It was a natural reaction because it was actually what Jovans said to Lulak. At that time, I was struggling with hard work. L.C. Lulak, who smiled and looked at Jovans, who was making a demeaning excuse, said. Even though I had endured so much, today I couldn't help but see your majesty. Please forgive me. What the hell is going on? From this dawn. Jovans was also curious and couldn't stand it. To come to the room and wait like this without giving a word in advance, wasn't like Lulak. It's a surprise, but do you know what's going on with second Prince Perez? Perez. It was an unfamiliar name to call. It took a few seconds to realize that it was the name of his son, who had soon forgotten. If it were that child, the Empress would be taking good care of it. Are you saying that the reason you came today is because of that child? Unexpectedly, Jovans tilted his head. I would like to ask your majesty one thing. Did you really believe that the Empress will properly take care of the second prince and you entrusted her to take care of Perez? Lulak honors the emperor, but not with the Empress. It was their distinctive way of saying that the Lombardy states were unrivaled. Jovans responded whimsically to Lulak's speech, which seemed to be punishing him. Are you trying to interfere with the affairs of the imperial family now? Unlike the late emperor, Jovans was a relatively quiet emperor who had never been openly hostile to Lombardy, but he was quite wriggling when it comes to the heirs. I'm not saying to your majesty about the responsibility for your children. What's the use of such a thing to the imperial family? But. Lulak shook his head sadly. The seed sown by your majesty is not an excuse for your majesty's pleasure. You're kidding me. Jovans's attitude has become quite serious. What do you mean now? Explain correctly. To Jovans, who is impatient, Lulak smiled leisurely and said. But the words flowing out of his mouth weren't light at all. Anginas reported this year's estate revenue cut in half by half. Half. The fact that Anginas, the Empress's family, was taking tax evasion to some extent, was not new to Jovans either. However, the fact that it was half was embarrassed him. But there is something else that your majesty should pay more attention to. What is it? The person who found something strange in the tax statement reported it, but strangely, no action. It was as Lulak said. The expression disappeared from the emperor's startled face. Lulak poured oil regardless of the emperor's reaction. Isn't it true that quite a few people are working for Anginas with the money of the imperial family? It was also poured out. Isn't paying taxes important? You can't see it as an easy thing and close your eyes once. Even when the officials of the imperial family are cooperating in the matter. Isn't that obviously a scratch on His Majesty's circle? Well. The emperor rubbed his forehead as if he was having a headache. Watching it as if it very enjoyable play, Lulak threw the second stone he brought. This time, hoping for a bigger ripple in the lake. I apologize to your majesty. Do you remember the mine located on the offshore of the Sèvres River? I remember. The iron mine that the late emperor left to Lombardy in case of emergency was sold to Baraport family by my son. Baraport. They are one of the best family members of Angina's. In case Dorelli family was deposed from the throne, they put their assets little by little and left them secretly to Lombardy. For example, 5,000 gold bars sleeping in the deepest part of the Lombardy bank vault. Or, externally, it is known as a small and invisible mine, but in fact, a mine with iron was an example. It was a long-standing pledge that Dorelli and Lombardy do not turn their backs against each other. Although the documents have Barraport seal stamped on it, it is very clear who the real mine owner is. Of course, it was Schultz family who took the mining business, but Lulac didn't dare to comment on that. Angines may not have known what kind of mine it was, but the cave has grown enough to reach out to iron ore. Iron ore was a very important military resource. Iron, which is the material of weapons, was a resource possessed by very few families, including the imperial family in Lombardy. And it goes without saying that they were only families who had been loyal to the imperial family for a long time. Although Angines were the empress's family, they were originally more aristocratic than imperial family. Iron ore was not a property allowed to them. And it is His Majesty that made them able to dream presumptuous dreams. It's my fault. That doesn't make sense. Don't you give Angines strength? You didn't even care about your first son and threw the second son to the empress. Rabini Angines didn't even care about killing or saving the maid's child. Whether she left him or killed him. Jovans was not a stupid emperor. First of all, it was in Lulac's evaluation. He was bright, and quick to read the lines of people and words. Just like now. Then, are you saying that the empress hurt Perez? The second prince. Fortunately, he's still alive. I think he had eaten the poison. Ha! Jovans lost his words and burst into laughter. The affection for the son of a maid that he couldn't even remember his name was definitely zero. Rather, it was caused by the resentment and anger toward the empress, who dared to touch his veins. Lulac said while pushing the glass of water in front of the emperor. Of course, it was a very good number to empower Angines with words to fight against me, Your Majesty. Jovans, who read the meaning, flinched, but Lulac smiled happily when he saw it. It was close to the look of the teacher's well-bred disciple. You gave me too much. That was the problem. I don't even know my ship is going to burst, and I'm still greedy. Now it's time to take the power. However, Your Majesty doesn't have to do anything. Jovans's hand that pressing hard on his greasy forehead, stopped. Lulac laughed at the emperor. And he made an offer that the emperor would never refuse. I will be the villain. 9 I and Perez sat face to face on the bed. The one sofa was piled up with dust and the floor was like a cold bone, so it was an unavoidable choice. The black hair still covering the nape, the white skin, and the eyes as red as the lips looked at me. Perez, you. His long eyelashes trembled a little in one blink. Are you a little taller? I think. Perez replied, nodding his head with a grim face. Because your head was bigger than others. I muttered, recalling the appearance of the guy in my previous life. Standing in a crowd gathering crowded with words that the new prince was delivered, that was all I saw once from a distance. The figure of Perez, who looked down at everything with his cold eyes, swinging his cloak with a more angular body than the knights around him, captivated the crowd at once. Who? Ha! Oh, no. But it's hard to imagine that the guy in front of me is growing up as such an adult. Compared to Prince Perez, who was like a big wolf with black fur and gloss, this guy is. Who are you thinking about now? They are equally expressionless, but now Perez is a little more. Puppy. He tilts his head at my unexpected words. Look at that, like a real dog. No, it's like a puppy. Do you have any puppy you have? No. I'm going to raise one now. Do you like a puppy? I like it too. I haven't seen it, but I'll definitely like it because you like it, 19 It was Perez muttering words of unknown meaning. Did you do well with the homework I gave you? Eat food, take medicine when the maid comes to lie down, and practice swordsmanship. He replied right away, sticking his fingers one by one. Okay. I did it. As you tell me, everything. Is it my imagination that the dark tail flutters behind his bright face? Shall I show you? Perez asked like wanted to grab a wooden sword and swing it right now. No. That's not important now. You have to get a prize because you did your homework well. Isn't it? Prize. While I took my bag, I laughed. I don't know that Perez's gaze will follow my hand while I untie the knot on the lid of the bag that is tied. Now, I will give a prize to a good child. Am I a Santa? I said while opened my bag. Chapter 49 You are listening at novelfull.audio. The first thing I took out of the gift bag was a thick autumn and winter cloak. It had a similar design to the black cloak worn by adult Perez. Once I roughly brushed off the dust, I wrapped it around Perez's neck. He moved his red eyes and watched the thick cloak clung to his shoulders. Well, it suits you well. So there was a reason why he wore only that. I thought it was school uniform. Perez's black hair and flawless skin stood out more than her cloak with colorful patterns. Don't go cold and dress well. I watched Perez, wearing the cloak that I gave, and took out a second gift. It was a wooden sword. Ugh, it's heavy. My both arms are overwhelming by it. I know you already have a wooden sword, but the last time I saw it, it seemed too light for you. So I brought it. In fact, it is more accurate to say that the twins have thrown it away. Perez doesn't need to know the details. Look at it once. At my words, Perez held a wooden sword in one hand and swung it briefly. Howook. The sound of cutting through the wind was different because there was a very heavy and thick iron core embedded in the wooden sword. Ah! The eyes of the indifferent guy turned around. How do you like it? Ha! Then take this as well. What I took out of my bag was a swordsmanship book. Perez, who received a book covered in tough leather, read aloud the title on the cover. Brown Swordsmanship. Right. It's not Imperial Swordsmanship Book, but Brown Swordsmanship Book. Perez seems doesn't know the difference between the two. This is why it is not worth giving a luxury product. I eventually had to explain it myself. It's actually similar to Imperial Swordsmanship. What was once called Brown Swordsmanship is now generally called Imperial Swordsmanship. But doesn't this look a little old? Yes, it is. Then what does it mean? Is this really a book with Brown Swordsmanship written on it? Yeah. That's right. Even the former Brown Lord directly revised and reorganized this. It was unexpected luck that this book came into my hands. I immediately thought of Perez when I found it stuck in a room corner my grandfather had made for me. This original Brown Swordsmanship is the perfect gift for him. Unlike me, who was so excited, he still looked down at the book in his hand again with a calm face. However, I could see he stroked the cover of the book with his finger. By the way, it may be a little disappointing, but it's not yours. Then. For now, you can read the book as you wish. But someone might ask for it later. Then you have to give it. Nope. What? No matter what I said or did, he nodded and said okay, but this is the first time he didn't. I was a little embarrassed and asked again. Perez looked at my surprised face for a moment with eyes slightly covered with black bangs, then replied with his gaze lowered. Okay. I'll give it. What was that? I was surprised. But well, it means that you liked the book that much. I added words to comfort him. I'll find a better one later. Don't be too sad. Are you listening to me or not? Perez's little finger squeezed the corner of the book. Somehow, my conscience is stabbed. It seems like I became a bad adult who gave a toy to a child and took it away. Okay, will you give me a better book later? But I didn't have an answer. I just nod my head. He is easily spoiled by something like this. When I recall the future of Perez, who was blowing so fast that a single needle could not fit in, I felt a cute feeling because I was still young. This is all for you, the prince of the future. I searched inside my bag, thinking of trying to understand his deep heart. Somehow, I need something to relieve Perez's anger. Okay, here. What I popped out was a bottle full of candy, like the one I gave with the milk and medicine last time. The appearance of colored round candy in a transparent glass bottle was a good one to see. Oh, this. Sweet. Perez's interest, who has embraced the book as if he didn't want it to be taken away, finally moved to something else. After all, a child is a child. I deliberately shook the bottle to make a sound and handed over Perez's hand. Do you like sweets? It's not the original, but I like this. Then, would you like something sweeter and more delicious? Anything sweeter and more delicious. I managed to get Perez's attention, then pulled a small box out of my bag. Always on the table in my study room and my living room. It's a chocolate cookie. Chocolate. Perez looked at the black thing stuck in a savory cookie. Have you ever eaten this? I already knew from Estra that chocolate is not a common food yet. I picked up a chocolate cookie the size of my palm and gave it to Perez. Try it. The guy who hesitated for a while at my words bite the chocolate cookie. It's delicious. Right. Look at this. I brought this much to you to eat. It's chocolate that others haven't even seen in a lifetime, but in my house, it was like a tissue stocked in every space. I collected and brought all the things in my room, living room, and so on, so there would be more than 30 snacks. I should eat one too. Oh, I'm hungry. After holding one more to Perez's other hand, I bite a little of a cookie. The sticky yet crazy sweet taste spreads in my mouth, so I think I'll eat a little more. I can't eat breakfast and move from dawn. Ahem, I'm sleepy. Honestly, I don't really know what the cookie tastes other than sweet. I roughly pushed it into my mouth and slumped on my side. Perez, who had finished one and was about to eat the other, looked at me. I don't mind, eat. I need to sleep. I feel tired and sleepy, and I fall asleep. I looked at Perez eating a cookie while lifting my increasingly heavier eyelids a few times. I can see a piece of chocolate in his mouth. I wanted to tell him to wipe it, but I was falling asleep without even knowing. He was like a rabbit when he's staring his red eyes at me lying down and yawn my mouth. It was funny that such a cute kid would later become such a cold prince. However, it was a good thing that he didn't have to suffer anymore. I thought while looking at the red eyes that were still staring at me. Still, I've done this much, but will he pretend not to know it completely later? At least, when I try to become the Lord of Lombardy after he becoming a prince, he will not be a hindrance, right? Yes, that's it. That's when the time to close my eyes becomes longer than the time I open my eyes. I could see Perez slumping across from me. You are also tired. Well, the sun has just risen. It's too early for a child to get up and move. Sleep a little and wake up. The last thing I saw before I fell asleep was Perez's white face looking at me with a cookie buried in his mouth. What should I do? Asked the voice softly. Both of you are sleeping so well. Then the other responded in a similar voice. Once, you guys go downstairs and grab your Majesty's goods. At the quiet command, the light steps of several people began to move. By the way, if you have talent, they're cute enough to make it as a picture. As if he didn't know what to do, it was Kailas Herring, a servant of the imperial palace, who spoke with his mouth. With dark blonde hair and friendly blue eyes, Kailas was the second son of the Herring family, one of Lombardy's vassal families. He was a young man who has been joining the Imperial Palace for 10 years now, but he was already an elite among the elite, qualified as a first-class servant. And it was Caitlin Brown, the deputy chief of the Imperial Palace, who looked at the bed with affectionate eyes as well. However, the two changed their affiliations just an hour ago. It was the Second Imperial Palace where they were commanded, and they were willing to move their enemies. Sorry, I don't know the right translation. I will let them sleep for a while. I also need time to clear up the first floors. Yes. I heard a lot about Galahad's daughter, but it's my first time seeing him. So is he the second prince? Originally, Kailas, who likes children, couldn't take his eyes off. But how can this be so cute, both of you? It was a little fuss, but Caitlin agreed with Kailas. The two children lying facing each other on a bed full of sweets and fell asleep without knowing the world. 3 Both Florentia, with curly brown hair, and Perez, with hair that is somewhat bushy but black like the night sky, both had very cute looks that anyone could look at once again. What's more, the cutest thing to dig into the heart of Kailas and Caitlin was that the two children were covered in one black cloak together. 1 I have to cover it up a little bit more properly. In case the children would wake up, Kailas, who tried to wrap the robe back, saw something and shut his mouth again. When Caitlin was curious, she saw Perez's hand holding Florentia's little hand tightly under the cloak. 30 Boo. Already, Kailas closed his eyes so as not to make a loud sound like someone who was badly injured. It was because of the excessive cuteness that suddenly came in, causing an overload. 2 After taking a few deep breaths in that state, Kailas tried to put the cloak back on Florentia's shoulders. Widely. If it weren't for Perez's strong strength holding his arm like that. The second prince. Perez, who had been sleeping a little while ago, had his eyes opened and held firmly on Kailas's wrist. Who is it? Oh, that's me. Kailas lost his words to the hand squeezing his wrist. Isn't that a kid who just turned 11 years old? But what is this PowerPoint for? Instead of embarrassed Kailas, Caitlin said in a calm voice. Good to meet you, His Majesty the Prince. We are the ones who will be with His Majesty the Prince from today. My name is Caitlin Brown. Plus, well, this is Kailas Herring, His Majesty the Prince. Kailas barely answered. However, the alertness did not disappear from Perez's face. It was then. Woo! Florentia slowly awakened and making a small sound. Chapter 50 You are listening at NovelFull.audio. At the same time, Perez released Kailas's arm, which he had grasped so tightly. I slept well. Florentia stretched out as hard as she could, and then found the man standing in front of her and asked innocently. Who? As soon as Florentia opened her eyes, it was the opposite reaction from Perez, who raised its claws and guarded like a wounded cat. Kailas, who had been holding his suddenly released arm, came to his senses and greeted her. Hello, Miss Florentia Lombardy. I'm Kailas Herring, the attendant of the Second Imperial Palace. Oh, the Second Imperial Palace. Florentia, who blinked his big eyes for a moment, nodded and said while clapping his hands small. If it's a herring, is it a herring family from the Lombardy Scholarship Foundation? Yes, that's right, lady. And Caitlin is here too. Did you sleep well, young lady? Caitlin greeted politely. Wow, nice people came. It was like she had already known that someone would come. Kailas tilted his head inward and looked at Perez. Where did Perez that a few moments ago seemed to break Kailas' hand, when he was about to touch Florentia, go? He now looking at the figure of Florentia smiling wide. Kailas and Caitlin quietly exchanged eyes. It seems that the two are not usually together. Caitlin approached and arranged the messy hair and clothes for Florentia. Perez looked closely at the Florentia, who was being cared for by them familiarly, and asked. Do you know they are? Yeah. I saw Caitlin when I came to the mansion before. Kailas. I've seen him for the first time, but he was from a family that's very close to my family. At Florentia's words, Kailas laughed proudly. It was because Herring, Lombardy's vassal, seemed to be receiving recognition. You both will be tired, but now you have to move. We are moving. Perez hardened his face. Kailas missed it. Although this palace is at the same level as a ruined house, it was a place where the second prince was born, raised, and had memories with his mother. Kailas was hesitant to explain this, but Florentia said while holding Perez's hand. A new palace must be given to you. I don't need it. Perez said fairly firmly. No, you need it. What you need the most right now is the palace. However, Florentia's words were even more decisive. Why? Because this is too close to the Empress Palace. At Florentia's straightforward words, Kailas was amazed and coughed. Caitlin looked around to see if the door was closed. You know what I mean. Ha! Kailas sweeps his chest down. If Perez never wants to go and insists on not moving to the new palace, things get very complicated. In any case, giving down a new palace was a great gift from His Majesty the Emperor, and rejecting it could be seen as rejecting orders, no matter how small children. Perez still a child, so it was okay to force him to move, but he's still a prince anyway, and Kailas didn't want to start messing his first meeting with his master. Besides, Perez is too strong. Seeing the wrist that was caught by Perez a while ago was still sore, it seemed like it was bruising. However, Kailas, who was born as an innately capable servant, laughed while touching his sore wrist. A good prince, too. Even basic food, clothing, and shelter have not been provided and has already lived alone for several months. Nevertheless, Perez had many unique corners at a glance. For example, the extraordinary beauty, the power you cannot think of as a child, and the charismatic gaze that was staring at Kailas a little while ago. Thinking that the person he will be serving in the future is good in many ways, Kailas spontaneously tightened his shoulders and raised his mouth. Then he stepped forward and said. The palace that His Majesty gave to the second prince is Poirak Palace, located on the east side of the Imperial Palace. It is about the size of the palace that Your Majesty Emperor used when His Majesty was a prince. In addition to the building itself, it is even bigger if you consider the gardens included in the Poirak Palace, the maids, and the attendants. It is the same size as the palace of Astana, the first prince. I like that. Florentia exclaimed with great satisfaction. That again. No, Astana will have a little stomachache. Because she is Lombardy's direct line, she is not hesitating in words and actions. But there is no one here to condemn it. Rather, just Lombardy's people. Caitlin and Kailas quarreled. Come on, Perez. Florentia said when she stepped out of bed. To see your new house. Wow. Standing in front of us was a Poirak palace, ready to meet the new owner. I admired it without knowing it. It's really big. Poirak Palace was a much larger palace than I thought. I liked it even more because it was a location where I had to take a long carriage ride from the separate palace where Perez lived and go completely to the other side of the Imperial Palace. Did you like it? I who have a small place compared to this was envied, and my stomach aches at the moment. I don't know this refers to Perez who envies Tia or Tia who envies Perez. When you read the next paragraph it's Tia comparing her house, but in fact, Florentia has no reason to be envious. I decide it refers to Tia. Sorry for the mistakes, the Lombardy mansion is also large, but the house where my father and I are staying is on a small level with a few rooms. And when I looked back at him, Perez couldn't take his eyes off the Poirak Palace and the busy servants. Yes, I did a good job. In fact, if you are a prince, you have to be treated like this from the beginning and grow up. It's ridiculous that Perez had suffered alone while being stuck in that separate palace. Probably, in the afternoon, everything will be ready. Said Caitlin. It's fast. It's because the Lord moved it directly. After all, my grandfather was awesome. I hesitated a lot to ask my grandfather to do Perez's work. But again, my choice was right. Caitlin had nothing to say, and Kailas seemed to be a good person. This way, Perez won't have to eat poison and have a miserable childhood. And if you live surrounded by good Lombardy people since childhood, Perez will surely have the impression of a Lombardy servant. That was my plan. To make a good relationship between Perez and Lombardy, who will later become princes. 3 That's why he will give me strength when I later try to become a matriarch. Now don't hesitate and live here. There was a lot of work, but what I did was simple. It only created an environment in which Perez could live comfortably while enjoying the things like the prince. Why do you say that? What? Why are you talking like it's over? The complexion of the guy who looked at Poirac Palace as if he had been possessed a while ago became dark. I felt like I was looking at the sky covered with dark clouds that would rain right now. Oh, no, it's not like that. It's too big. What is so big about it? So take responsibility. 3 Perez's finger gripped the tip of my sleeve. You have to come often. 6 Often. I'm busy. But the look of the guy who sees me who doesn't give a definite answer is fierce. Was he the kid? How can he know how to make this kind of expression? Then, I suddenly thought of the future of Perez and convinced him. Once, I will write letters often. Okay. The shabby guy's shoulders droop again. It was then. Karuk. A very loud sound came from Perez, who pretends not to hear. I guess he hasn't eaten properly in a few days. I spoke to Kailas on behalf of Perez. We are hungry. Please give us food. Chengrang.1 The teacup that Empress holding was broken with a loud noise. What did you say now? Even today, the maid who spoke to the Empress, became more white and tired when she looked at the teacups on the floor. However, no matter how afraid, she knew that if she didn't answer, she would be punished even more, so she struggled to squeeze her voice. True, His Majesty gave the second prince. His Majesty Emperor gives Poirac Palace to the second prince. Her Majesty Empress. Where is His Majesty now? Eating at the patronage of the Imperial Palace. Beep. The Empress, who was being dressed leisurely, got up in a hurry from where he was sitting. Bring a dress. Right now. The dress skirts of the maids fluttered along the corridor, following the Empress's quick steps. After attaining the patronage of the Imperial Palace, Empress raised her voice and began to call the Emperor. Your Majesty. Your Majesty, where are you? At that time, instead of answering, there was the loud laughter of the Emperor and another person. Haha. That's a smart kid. It was the Emperor who burst into laughter while tapping on the table of patronage. Rabini said, turning around the corner with a glamorous smile. Your Majesty, you were here. But the next moment, her smile disappeared like it was washed with water. Oh. Empress. Welcome. Lombardy's lord has just visited, so let's have a cup of tea as well. Rabini realized. Suddenly, the reason why the emperor was interested in the second prince, and the reason why he gives the Poirac Palace. Everything was done by an old Lombardy man. It's been a long time, Empress. Lulac Lombardy greeted her while standing up from his seat. Lulac, who couldn't stand the anger and watched her, trembling, said to the emperor. I think I have to go, Your Majesty. No, why are you leaving now? There's something I need to take care of at Poirac Palace on the way out. Oh, is that right? Then I will see you off to the carriage. While the two had a conversation like a close relative whom they had met after a long time, Rabini trembled with a sense of alienation, like he had become a complete outsider. And the feeling culminated when Lulac's eyes passed her. Lulac left and the emperor followed him. That means she couldn't stand there stupidly. The empress forcefully smiled and followed the emperors back to see Lulac off. When it is time to pass through the corridor in front of the main door where the Lombardy carriage is waiting. A man was standing. It was Lulak's son, V's Lombardy. He stayed at the Empress Palace last night. When he heard the news, he was startled and jumped. Dumb. Lulak Lombardy, who took the lead, gradually became closer to V's. Oh, father. V's, who was contemplated like a child caught in stealing, was hardened with no courtesy to the emperor. And Lulak Lombardy passed by without even paying attention to him. 1 He made his first son look like a non-existent person. 3 V's groaned like he was having a nightmare, and could not even think of following Lulak. He stood as if he had been nailed to the spot. 1 Well, see you sooner or later. Now show your face often, Lord. Lulak and the emperor greeted each other as if no one else. So Lombardy's carriage leaves. Rubini, who kept biting her lips and suppressing her anxiety, approached the emperor and opened her mouth. Sire. She was amazed. What do you do, Empress? He is looking at her and smiling. It's a smile that's not so different from before. But the emperor's eyes changed. Her hand, realizing it instinctively, fell weakly. I have to go to see Amon's office. The empress will also return to rest. There was no mention of the second prince. Now she was sentenced to have no authority over the second prince. The emperor returns to the office, and Rubini has been unable to move in place for a while as V's did.